Welcome to the Explainer. Have you ever noticed how sometimes a single word can do two completely different jobs? Today, we are looking at a fascinating linguistic mystery. We've got a word that groups two wildly different meanings under the exact same spelling. And honestly, mastering it is going to instantly elevate the precision of your vocabulary.
All right, let's jump right into section 1. Two very different scenes.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture two completely distinct scenarios in your head. On the one hand, imagine a dedicated scientist in a pristine lab. They are carefully, methodically assuming a certain premise is true just so they can run a structured test, right? It's calm, it's logical, it's highly calculated. But now, contrast that with the other scenario. Imagine a total stranger boldly barging into a private room, making loud demands, stepping way out of line where they have absolutely zero right to be. It's abrasive, right? It's downright rude. So, how on earth could these two radically different scenes, one deeply logical and quiet, the other wildly inappropriate and loud, possibly share the exact same word?
Well, let's find out in section 2. Meet the word.
Okay, the suspense is over. The single, powerful word that unites these two vastly different scenarios is presumption. Now, let's lock in that pronunciation together. Go ahead and say it with me out loud wherever you are right now. Presumption. Yep, 3 syllables, presumption. Presumption. Grammatically speaking, it is a noun. A word representing a thing or a concept. But as you'll see, it's a highly flexible concept that stretches right across human behavior.
Moving along to section 3, the two anchor senses.
So, to really grasp how this works without just, memorizing a dictionary page, I want you to think of this word as a conceptual arch built on two distinct anchors, and this brilliantly illustrates the divide. Our first anchor, sense 1, is all about a held belief. It is a belief taken for granted. Think of an assumption accepted as true, sometimes entirely without proof. It's basically a mental shortcut you make in your head. Now firmly separate that from our second anchor, sense 2. This is purely about attitude. We're talking excessive boldness, sheer nerve, or acting way beyond what's considered proper. Do you see the architectural span here? We're going all the way from holding a quiet assumption in your mind to physically acting out with rude boldness.
So how exactly do we get from a quiet belief to straight-up rude behavior? Well, the bridge connecting them is the core concept of taking something for granted. Sense 1 happens when you take a fact for granted. You just assume it's true. But sense 2 kicks in when you take a right you haven't earned for granted. You assume you have permission or authority when you absolutely do not. It's an absolutely fascinating psychological leap encoded right into our vocabulary.
Let's see this in action in section 4, word detective in context. The absolutely crucial point here is knowing how to spot which version of the word is being used when you're out there reading or listening. Let's act as word detectives and see exactly how these two flavors of the word operate in the wild. Read this quote with me. She was tired of the presumption that the scientist must be her husband. Wow, you can really feel the empathy and the frustration there, right? This perfectly captures our first sense of the word. People are taking an unproven belief for granted. They're making a quiet internal assumption, in this case a heavily biased one, without checking any of the evidence. It is entirely about a belief held as fact.
Now let's look at another example of sense 1, but this time in a highly structured environment. The court began with a presumption that the accused was innocent. The famous presumption of innocence. Notice how calm, logical, and honestly vital this is. It acts as a foundational, reasonable assumption that literally makes the entire justice system function. It's a fact actively taken for granted for the sake of fairness and process.
But then, we run into a sentence exactly like this one. It was sheer presumption for him to give orders that weren't his to give. Whoa, the tone totally shifts, doesn't it? We aren't talking about a quiet, logical belief anymore. We're talking about dramatic, rude overstepping. It's the sheer nerve of taking a right you haven't earned for granted. It perfectly showcases our second anchor sense, that abrasive, excessively bold attitude. Now, real quick, before we test your skills, I want to introduce you to a related morphological family member of our word, the adjective presumptuous. What's incredibly helpful to know here is that presumptuous drops the whole arch concept entirely. It exclusively anchors itself to the too bold side of our word. If you call someone presumptuous, you are never saying they made a polite, logical assumption. You are always saying they're being way too bold, stepping out of line, and acting with unearned nerve.
All right, section 5, your turn to try.
Okay, we've broken down the definition, analyzed the conceptual arch, and investigated the quotes together.
Now I'm turning the tables. It's your turn to try. How would you use presumption once to mean a quiet, held assumption, and then a second time to mean pure nerve or overstepping? Can you construct 2 sentences in your head right now that highlight this dual nature? Like, maybe think about a time someone made a presumption about your favorite hobby, versus a time a coworker had the absolute presumption to eat your lunch out of the fridge without asking. Give it a try. Honestly, constructing these sentences yourself is the absolute best way to make this explainer stick in your long-term memory.
To wrap up our explainer today, remember this core takeaway. Presumption is something taken for granted. Sometimes that's a belief, and sometimes that's just way too much boldness. It's a brilliant example of how much heavy lifting a single word can do in our language. Thank you so much for bringing your focus and acting as a word detective with me today. Keep pondering those sentences you built and ask yourself, the next time you jump to a conclusion, are you resting on a logical belief or are you just acting presumptuous? Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.